In tough times, there's hardly an organisation that won't be actively engaged in change management. Someone who can provide some more insights into this area is Professor Mike Bورn, who's identified 10 areas for us to consider that will help us when managing change in tough times. Mike, the first of these 2 points are forecasting realistically and setting trigger points. Can you tell me more about this, please?
We have, I think, an optimistic bias in us. And in tough times, it is really difficult to overcome to that. So the first thing you've really got to do is to forecast as realistically as you can, rather than just taking the most optimistic forecast and hoping that for the best. The second thing that I found very useful is to think about the point at which you need to take action when things really go wrong. And that's the trigger point. Now, quite often when you slide down the slope and things get bad, people keep putting off the point at which you take action. And what a trigger point does is has a conversation with the management team beforehand and say, well, it could get bad. If it gets to this level, we really need to do something about it. And you can get pre-agreement to doing something. And I think that's really important.
And I guess at some point we need to consider cost cutting. And the recommendation here is to make improvements and also to be creative, which I guess is easier said than done perhaps. But can you give some examples of this in practice?
I think cost cutting is the immediate thing we do. We always start to look at headcount and things like that. The question really is, what costs should we cut out altogether? Sometimes it may be better to stop offering a service or a product completely, because it takes a whole set of costs out in one go, rather than trying to just take a little bit of every line item in your ledger. And I prefer people to do that. You've got to think too, with cost cutting, about the service you're giving. Is the customer still going to pay for that if you've sliced it? So for me, cost cutting is about taking costs out, but it's also about focusing your resources on improving the performance that people will pay for. That's what really matters there.
Now, another two of the points are around timing and also setting objectives. So when would we begin this process, and how do we go about setting objectives?
Start as early as you can. If you see a problem coming, the sooner you start, the better the chance you have to react. Setting the objectives is really important. Setting targets is important, but you've got to be realistic about those targets. When the world turns down on you, you need to adjust the targets down as well. And then you've got to think, if people can't achieve those targets, what should they do? If people are selling, you load them up with the sales targets. But if the downturn comes, you may not be able to achieve those targets. So do you load your customer with stock they can't get rid of, or do you get your salespeople to actually get very close to the customers, treat them in a very fair and honest way, and then when the things pick up, you pick up when your competitors don't? And that's what I've seen one or two firms doing very effectively.
And leadership and motivation are going to be key points as well. And so what's the role of the leader in this process, and how do you go about motivating employees in difficult times?
It's hard. But it's leadership, not management. It's about being present. It's about being accessible. It's about understanding what people are going through and empathizing with that. But it's also being absolutely clear about what you're trying to achieve and what the future holds, and holding that vision in front of people. And that's the way you take people through it.
And I guess at times these changes can affect us personally. How would we go about, or how should one go about looking after oneself?
Well, I think one's got to realise that it could be you that is gets caught up in this change and loses your role, your position, or whatever it is. And you've got to be aware of that and ready for that. I think people have got to realise they've got a career, not a job these days, and they've got to create a set of skills that people want and need. So being involved in a change process is a great opportunity to do something that other people don't and have something on your CV. But at the end of it, there may not be a role for you. But that in itself can create opportunities elsewhere as well.
And the last of the 10 points really, I guess, is that change is often perceived quite negatively, but you identify that actually it provides its own opportunities as well. What's your view on that?
I think it does. We always see the negative sides of change. When you go back a few years later, you think, well, was it really like that? We all get caught up in the change at the point at which it happens and the uncertainty and the angst that it creates. But actually, when I think about the things I've learnt in my career, it's been at those points of the greatest change, the greatest issues, that things have actually come to me that I've then gone on and used again. And I think that's true for most people.
So in summary then, if you had to pick one or two of these points as being key, which ones would you go for?
I think forecasting realistically and trigger points are the real thing.